The night the trash meal almost started a war. The metal door slammed so hard that the entire tier shook. Every inmate inside San Quentin's North Block stopped what they were doing. Some froze mid-conversation. Some lifted their heads from their bunks. Others crept toward their cell doors, trying to see what was happening. But everyone heard it. A guard yelling, back up now." Then came the smell, sharp, sour, rotten. It drifted through the vents like a warning sign nobody asked for. Inside cell 214, a man named Lobo Ramirez, a lifer who'd survived San Quentin since the late 1990s, lifted a paper tray with 2 fingers, like he was holding a dead rat by the tail. The food inside looked worse than dog scraps. A soggy slice of bread, a scoop of something gray, a piece of mystery meat that was still half-frozen, and on top of it, a dead cockroach, not cooked into the food, sitting right on top, curled like it had crawled its last steps only seconds earlier. Lobo stared at the tray, then slowly raised his eyes toward the guard standing in front of his door. The entire tier went silent. The air felt like it was waiting to explode. "Take it back," Lobo said calmly. Too calmly. The guard didn't move. "It's chow. Eat it." That's when Lobo reached into the back of his cell, grabbed a small metal cup he'd turned into a makeshift stove, and held it under the fluorescent light. The cup was blackened from hundreds of burns. Next to it were tiny pieces of wire stripped from an old radio, twisted together like a spider web. Everybody in the block knew what that meant. It was his hot plate, a DIY cooking system he built out of trash, stolen parts, and raw desperation. But tonight, he wasn't using it to cook. He held it up as a message, a warning. "If the kitchen sends trash," Lobo said, "we'll cook for ourselves, and you won't like what happens next." Shouts erupted from other cells, some cheering him on, others banging on their metal doors. The tier turned into a boiling pot, second from spilling over. The guard stepped back, hand on his radio, and right then, at the height of the chaos, something happened that nobody expected. A different inmate, from a cell 3 doors away, slid a small plastic bag through the bars. Inside were chopped onions. Real onions. Where did he get them? How did he sneak them in? And more importantly, why was he giving them to Lobo? Before anyone could react, Lobo grabbed the onions, pulled the trash meal back into his cell, and started doing something that would change the entire block's fate that night. He wasn't protesting. He wasn't rioting. He was cooking. The entire tier watched in confusion as Lobo quietly turned the trash meal into something that smelled surprisingly good. But then someone yelled from the end of the tier, "Yo, Lobo, you gonna feed us too or what?" Lobo didn't answer. Instead, he did something that sent chills down the entire block. He slid the improved meal back toward the bars and handed it to someone outside his cell. Him sharing food was unheard of, forbidden, dangerous. This wasn't kindness. This was strategy. And as the guards scrambled to figure out what was happening, the inmates whispered the same question across the entire block. How did they turn trash meals into gourmet survival? Fade out. The trash meal problem that almost broke San Quentin. San Quentin is one of the oldest prisons in America, opened in 1852, and by the mid-2000s, it had a notorious reputation for overcrowding, violence, and what inmates called garbage chow. News reports from 2005, 2007, and 2013 all highlighted the same issue: low-quality food, spoiled ingredients, and flies in the kitchen. So when inmates said the meals were trash, they weren't exaggerating. For years, guys like Lobo Ramirez had eaten meals that felt less like nutrition and more like punishment. The trays were predictable: runny oatmeal, rubbery hot dogs, mushy beans, mashed potatoes that looked like wallpaper glue, and meat that came in shapes no animal had ever been born with. But it wasn't just about the food tasting bad. Inside San Quentin, food equals power. Food equals control. And most importantly, food equals survival. By 2011, San Quentin had nearly 5,000 inmates, and the cafeteria staff was stretched thin. Rumors began spreading across the tiers that some kitchen workers were mixing old leftovers with new food or watering down soups just to stretch supplies. Many inmates started skipping meals entirely, choosing hunger over nausea. But hunger does strange things to people. It sharpens instincts. It hardens personalities. It forces creativity. That's when inmates started turning to the only ingredients they could trust, the trash items everyone overlooked. Empty chip bags became frying pans. Broken light bulbs turned into heat sources. Old ramen seasoning packets became gold. Plastic spoons became cutting tools. Even toilet paper, when rolled tightly enough, became wicks for makeshift stoves. At first, this underground cooking culture started small, just a few guys remixing their meals to make them edible. But then came the meal that almost started a riot. It happened in 2014, during a hot day in July. California was going through a major drought, and the prison kitchen struggled to keep supplies fresh. That night, inmates were served trays of something that was supposed to be chicken, but smelled like it had sat in the sun all day. Dozens of inmates refused to eat. Guards ordered them to. The tea erupted in shouting. And that's when Lobo stepped forward for the first time. He walked to the bars, held up the rotten tray, and asked one simple question. "You'd eat this?" Silence. Even the guards didn't answer. That moment planted a seed, not of rebellion, but of possibility. Lobo wasn't the biggest man, not the loudest, not the most dangerous, but he was respected because he thought before he acted. And right then, he began thinking about a new system, a survival cooking network inside one of America's oldest and toughest prisons. He wasn't thinking about breaking rules. He was thinking about staying alive, and helping others stay alive too. Over the next months, Lobo gathered a tight group around him. Not gang members, not the usual power players. Instead, he chose the quiet ones, the thinkers, the problem solvers. A former chef from Oakland, a guy who once worked in a food truck in Fresno, another who grew up helping his grandmother cook in East L.A. They called themselves the Stove Crew, and they studied every piece of trash they could get their hands on. Every wrapper, every scrap, every wire. If something could burn, conduct heat, or hold food, they found a use for it. The first dish they ever made was simple. Hot spread, ramen, crackers, tuna, and seasoning. A prison classic. But the second dish, that one shocked the whole block. They used a broken fan motor to heat a metal surface. They crushed stale tortillas into crumbs. They diced a smuggled onion. And somehow, nobody knows how, they cooked a crispy chicken-style patty that tasted better than anything the cafeteria served that year. Once rumors spread, inmates started trading items for a taste of Stove Crew food. Soup packets, stamps, hygiene products, all became currency. But with attention comes danger. Because the more people wanted their food, the more guards noticed the smell of real cooking drifting down the tiers. One guard even asked, "Who's running a restaurant in here?" Nobody answered. But the truth? They were. And it was only a matter of time before someone tried to shut it down. Which brings us back to the night of the roach tray, the night the kitchen pushed too far. The guards lost control, and Stove Crew survival skills were tested in front of the entire block. As Lobo stood in his cell with his makeshift stove glowing red and the smell of onions filling the air, every inmate leaned forward, waiting to see what he would do next. And that's exactly where the trouble began. The secret kitchen that was never supposed to exist. The moment Lobo lifted that tray and began cooking in full view of the tier, something shifted inside San Quentin. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. But it was powerful, the kind of shift that makes everyone pause, because they know something big is beginning, even if they don't know what it is yet. The smell hit first, not the usual cafeteria odor, the watered-down beans, the burnt edges of mystery meat, the cardboard-like cornbread. No, this smell was different. Warm, sharp, fresh. It carried a note of onions, a hint of garlic powder someone must have bartered from commissary, and heat, real heat, the kind that came from a flame, not from a microwave in a control office. Inmates stepped to their doors like spectators approaching the edge of cliff. Some grabbed their metal mirrors, angling them to see around corners. Others crouched low to watch through the bottom bars as if witnessing a ritual they were never meant to see. Lobo's hands moved with a rhythm he'd learned long before prison, before the life sentence, before San Quentin turned him into a story whispered across tears. Back when he was just Luis Ramirez from Boyle Heights, helping his mother cook arroz con pollo in a tiny kitchen with yellow tiles. But this wasn't his mother's kitchen. This was the most dangerous prison in California, and he was cooking on a device made out of trash, wire, and a stripped fan coil, something that could get him thrown into solitary instantly if a guard realized what he was actually doing. But the guard on duty had backed up, radio in hand, unsure whether he was watching a protest or something far more unpredictable, and the tear was holding its breath. The origins of the secret kitchen. People think prisoners get 3 meals a day, problem solved. But anyone who's been inside knows better. By 2014, when the trash meal crisis hit its peak, San Quentin's kitchen was feeding thousands of men with a budget that couldn't stretch far enough. And when budgets get tight, corners get cut. And when corners get cut, inmates get creative. It started small, a few men hiding plastic bags of commissary seasoning under their mattresses. Others began saving bread ends, drying them until they became crumbs. A guy everyone called Chef Boyardee once melted cheese from 6 ramen soups to make a sauce. But the bigger innovation, the breakthrough, came when an inmate named Marcus Sparks Holloway figured out that the metal plate inside a broken radio got hot enough to cook eggs if you attached 2 stripped wires and connected them to a wall socket. Dangerous? Absolutely. Illegal? Completely. Effective? More than anyone expected. Word spread fast. Suddenly, radios were being broken at an unusual rate. Fan motors started disappearing from day rooms. Even screws from bunk frames began vanishing, perfect for holding up the makeshift grill plates. This wasn't just cooking. This was engineering. But when sparks started flying, literally, someone had to take control before the entire tier burned down. That someone became Lobo. He didn't want power. He didn't want authority. What he wanted was dignity. Food played a role in that, a big one, and he believed every man deserved at least one warm, safe, edible meal. And so the stove crew was born. Their kitchen wasn't a place. It was a network, spread across cells, hidden behind books, underneath mattresses, behind false backs in lockers. Each member built a piece of the puzzle. One hid the spices. One hid the heating coil. One kept the wires. Another held the insulation, torn cloth from a state-issued blanket. The kitchen moved. It breathed. It adapted. And the more they learned, the more they realized they could turn ANY prison trash item into something useful. Empty soup cups became mixing bowls. Coffee lids became cutting boards. Toothpaste caps became spice containers. Metal bed frames became heat diffusers. Magazine pages worked as funnels. Even rolled toilet paper was turned into slow-burning candles that could keep food warm for minutes at a time. It was a kind of ingenuity you only see when people are desperate and brilliant at the same time. The guard who suspected everything. But not everybody was impressed. One guard, Officer Bennett, had been watching Lobo for weeks. Bennett wasn't new. He'd been at San Quentin since 1998 through lockdowns, stabbings, riots, power outages, and the statewide hunger strike in 2013. He wasn't easily fooled, and he knew the look of a man hiding something. So on that night, the night of the roach tray, Bennett stepped closer, 1 foot at a time, eyes narrowed. "What are you doing, Ramirez?" Lobo didn't look up. "Fixing dinner." "That's contraband, and you know it." Lobo lifted the spoon, stirring the sizzling mixture. The sound was almost surreal, a soft crackle of onions hitting heat, echoing inside a place where real cooking was never supposed to happen. "Only contraband if you find it," Lobo said calmly. The tear erupted again, not in violence, but in laughter. Nervous laughter. Dangerous laughter. Bennett reached for his radio. But then he stopped, because something unexpected happened. The inmate from 3 cells down, the same one who passed the onions earlier, slid something else through the bars. A small plastic bag with cilantro, fresh cilantro, inside San Quentin. Bennett's jaw tightened. That meant someone on the laundry crew, kitchen crew, or delivery truck was smuggling produce into the block. That meant corruption. That meant paperwork. And investigations. And headaches. He pointed at the bag. "Where'd you get that?" The inmate shrugged. "Grocery store." More laughter. But Bennett didn't react. His eyes were on Lobo, the man cooking a gourmet survival dish inside a 5x9 concrete box. And suddenly Bennett realized something. This wasn't a one-night stunt. This wasn't a protest. This was organized. If Lobo could turn a rotten tray into something edible, even desirable, then he had influence. Influence meant power. Power meant leverage. And leverage meant risk. San Quentin had seen what happened when inmates gained too much influence. It didn't end well, so Bennett made a decision, one that would change everything. He leaned forward and whispered, "At 9 o'clock count, I'm searching your cell. All of it." The tier went dead silent. Searching a cell wasn't unusual, but threatening one right after an inmate publicly defied the kitchen, that was something different. Something personal. Lobo finally looked up, and he smiled, not because he wasn't scared, but because he had already planned for this. "We're clean," Lobo said. Bennett didn't believe a word of it, but that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that Lobo wasn't cooking just for himself that night. He was preparing something for someone else. Someone important. Someone whose involvement could turn the entire prison upside down. And as steam lifted from the tray, carrying the smell of onions and something dangerously close to hope, the inmates whispered the same question. Who's he cooking for? And the answer was about to create a storm inside San Quentin. The meal that could start a war. The tier was vibrating with tension. Every man on the block sensed it, the same way people feel a storm building long before thunder hits. Lobo wasn't just cooking. He wasn't remixing a meal. He was preparing something with purpose, something planned, something dangerous in a place where even sharing a cookie with the wrong person could get you stabbed. The smell of onions and sizzling seasoning drifted through North Block like a message wrapped in steam. Men stood at their bars silently, shoulders tight, eyes locked on Lobo's every move. Some whispered. Some smiled nervously. Others didn't make a sound. The old-timers who had lived through real prison wars and knew what this feeling meant. Something big was coming, and nobody could figure out who the food was for. Not yet. The power of a meal in prison. In the free world, a meal is just a meal. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but it's never life-changing. In prison, it's everything. A meal can form alliances. A meal can start fights. A meal can end fights. A meal can repay a debt or create one that lasts for years. So when Lobo began cooking openly, using trash, homemade equipment, and ingredients that had no business being inside San Quentin, every inmate felt the weight of the moment. Nobody cooks like that for themselves. Nobody risks solitary for a normal meal. Nobody makes something that smells like a street taco truck at midnight, unless the stakes are high. And in a place as racially fractured and politically volatile as San Quentin, the stakes were always high. So the question spread from cell to cell, bouncing around the block like an echo. Who's about to eat that? Even the guard were wondering. Officer Bennett, standing by the rails, watched the scene with folded arms and clenched teeth. He didn't like situations that didn't follow patterns. And this broke every pattern he'd ever learned in his 16 years on the job. One inmate whispered to another, "Bet it's for Sleepy from B-section. Dude hasn't eaten in 3 days." "Nah," another replied, "probably for Big Ray. He controls 2 tiers. Lobo's buying protection." A third voice cut in, "You're both wrong. That meal's for the Serenos. Watch." But they were all wrong, and the truth was more shocking than all of their guesses combined. The unlikely ally. 3 cells down from Lobo lived a man named Anthony Tone Hutcherson, a former high school football star from Vallejo. He wasn't gang-affiliated, not claimed, not protected, not feared, just a regular guy doing time for a bad mistake, trying to survive the oldest prison in California. Tone kept to himself. He read books. He wrote letters. He worked in the laundry. But a month earlier, something happened that changed his life inside San Quentin. He collapsed, right there in the laundry room. No warning, no shout, just dropped. By the time the guard dragged him out, he was unconscious and barely breathing. Turned out Tone had a severe digestive condition, one the prison medical unit didn't take seriously. They gave him medicine that made things worse, not better, and for weeks he struggled to keep even the basic tray food down. The nurses said he'd be fine. Tone said he wasn't. The kitchen didn't change anything. The guard shrugged, and one night, after vomiting for hours, Tone whispered through the wall to Lobo, "I think the food's killing me." Lobo didn't respond immediately. He just sat on his bunk, staring at the worn concrete floor. He knew what it meant when San Quentin ignored someone's problem. You either solved it yourself, or you didn't survive it. And Lobo wasn't planning to watch someone die on his tier. Not if he could prevent it. That's why, on the night of the roach tray, when the block exploded in anger and confusion, Lobo didn't start cooking for power, or for influence, or for rebellion. He was cooking for Tone, a man who had nothing to offer him. No protection, no favors, no gang, no leverage. Just a sick inmate trying to survive meals that weren't meant for someone with his health condition. But Lobo didn't tell the tier that, because helping Tone publicly could be seen as choosing a side. And inside San Quentin, choosing a side was like lighting a match in a room full of gasoline. The food was almost ready now. Lobo had diced the onions as fine as razor shavings. He'd mixed seasoning until the gray meat turned golden. The roach-contaminated tray was now unrecognizable, transformed into something that looked like it belonged in a home kitchen, not a prison cell. Steam rose from the improvised skillet, forming a cloud that hovered just below the fluorescent lights like a signal flare. Then Lobo did the unthinkable. He lifted the refashioned meal, wrapped the bottom in a torn-up T-shirt to keep from burning his hands, and stepped toward his bars. The tier went silent. He looked left. He looked right. He waited for a guard to shout. He waited for someone to stop him. Nobody did. Then he leaned forward, slid the upgraded meal across the floor with a slow, controlled push, and let it glide down the tier like a sacred offering. Every inmate followed the tray with their eyes. One man held his breath. Another whispered, "No way." Even Officer Bennett leaned forward. The tray kept sliding, until it reached cell 217. Tone's cell. Tone, skinny, pale, weak, stepped forward and picked it up with shaking hands. That moment, that tiny gesture, sent shockwaves through the block. Not because Lobo helped a sick inmate, but because of what it symbolized. He crossed lines. He ignored politics. He broke invisible rules between groups. He acted like a leader in a place where leadership always came with violence. Officer Bennett's face went red. He grabbed his radio. "Control, I need a supervisor on North Block, now." Too late. The tray had already changed hands. And in prison, once a meal changes hands, so does responsibility. Lobo now owed protection. Tone now owed gratitude. And the entire block now owed attention. The moment Tone took his first bite, slow, careful, like the food might disappear, a ripple went through the inmates watching. Lobo's feeding neutrals. That's against the politics. That puts him at risk. That puts all of us at risk. In prison, helping the wrong person is the fastest way to become a target. Lobo knew that, but he didn't care. What he cared about was a look on Tone's face as he ate real food for the first time in weeks, relief mixed with tears he tried hard to hide. That was why Lobo risked everything. But the danger was just beginning, because on the far end of the tier, someone who absolutely should not have been watching was watching. Someone with influence. Someone with soldiers. Someone who didn't like what alliances like this meant. And he stepped to his bars and said, "Ramirez, we need to talk. Now." The tier froze, and Lobo slowly turned his head toward the voice he had hoped would stay quiet just one more night. Deals, debts, and the man at the end of the tier. The voice from the end of the tier wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. "Ramirez, we need to talk. Now." Every head on the block turned in the same direction, like they were all pulled by the same invisible string. The man speaking was Derek D. Train Caldwell. He wasn't the biggest guy on the tier, or the loudest, or the wildest, but he was one of those men who carried weight without needing to prove it every day. He'd been in and out of California prisons since the late 1990s. By the time he hit San Quentin again in 2012 on a long stretch for armed robbery and assault, he'd seen enough violence to last several lifetimes. He didn't run a gang on paper. He didn't have a title. But everyone knew, if something happened on that tier, D-Train either already knew about it or was about to know about it. And if he said, "We need to talk," it wasn't a request. Lobo's hand tightened around the spoon he was still holding. The improvised skillet in his cell was cooling, the last of the steam fading into the fluorescent buzz overhead. Tone was 3 cells down, holding the tray like it was a newborn. He'd taken a few more bites, slower now, as he realized how many eyes were on him. He tried to stay small, invisible, but tonight there was no such thing. Officer Bennett stayed silent, watching. His hand hovered near his radio again, but he didn't press the button. He wanted to see where this went. Lobo stepped closer to his bars, keeping his voice steady. "What's up, D?" A low chuckle floated down the tier. "You tell me," D-Train answered. "You cooking for neutrals now? That what we do?" A few inmates muttered under their breath. Neutrals, unplugged guys, people who didn't belong to any group, and mostly tried to disappear into their time. In a place like San Quentin, that could be either respected or seen as weakness. Lobo chose his words carefully. "Man's sick," he said. "He can't eat that rotten chow. I just made it better." "You made it political," D-Train fired back. "You know that." Lobo didn't respond, because it was true. In prison, nothing is small. Nothing is simple. Even an act of kindness becomes a chess move someone else is forced to respond to. On one side of the tier, an older lifer shook his head slowly. "Here we go," he whispered. Another leaned into his bars. "This gonna turn ugly," he said. The air grew heavier, like the whole block was waiting for someone to swing first, with fists, with words, with a decision nobody could take back once it was made. D-Train stepped closer to his own bars, eyes locked on Lobo. "You know how this place works," he said. "You start feeding people like that, you're sending a message. You saying the chow hole don't control us. You saying the kitchen don't control us. You saying politics don't control us. You ready to back all that up." Lobo swallowed once. He wasn't a shot caller. He wasn't a gang rep. He was just a man who refused to watch someone starve slowly because being mush and mystery meat didn't work with their body. But inside San Quentin, motives didn't matter as much as appearances. He took a breath. "I'm saying," Lobo replied, "that if they're going to give us trash, we don't have to stay trash with it." Somebody whistled under their breath. Another voice said, "He wild for that." Even tone, still standing with a tray in his hands, looked like he wanted to disappear into the wall. Officer Bennett finally stepped in. "That's enough," he snapped, voice echoing off the concrete. "Back off your doors, all of you. Chow's over. Get ready for count." Nobody moved. For a few seconds, it felt like the prison itself had stopped breathing. Then D-Train spoke again, quieter this time, but sharper. "I'm gonna say this once," he said. "Ramirez, I respect what you did. Everybody out here knows the food's garbage. We ain't blind, but you don't start a movement without checking in." The word hung in the air. Movement. Lobo frowned slightly. "Ain't no movement," he said. "Just a meal." D-Train shook his head slowly. "Not anymore," he replied. He turned away from bars, but not before adding one more sentence, a sentence that made the hairs stand up on the back of Lobo's neck. "Tonight you fed him," D-Train said. "Tomorrow, they're gonna make you choose who you don't feed." He sat back on his bunk. Conversation ended, but the problem had only just begun. The block woke up again, a low murmur of voices, whispers, and quiet arguments leaking out from behind steel doors. Some men supported what Lobo did. Some thought he was reckless. Some didn't care, as long as they got their tray and avoided trouble. Up on the tier, Officer Bennett stared at Lobo for a long moment, then checked the clock on the wall. Count time was coming, and with it, the cell search he promised. Lobo saw that look. He knew what it meant. The hot plate, the fan coil, the wired plug, the hidden spices, the onions. If Bennett found any of it, it wouldn't just be a write-up. It would mean the whole administrative segregation. No stove crew, no survival network, no help for guys like Tone. Lobo turned away from the bars, heart thumping harder now, and moved quickly into the silent dance every prison cook knows, the cleanup. He unplugged the twisted wires from the half-exposed outlet near his bunk. He carefully wiped down the metal plate with the last clean corner of his T-shirt. He shook crumbs into his toilet, flushed twice, then ran his hands along the concrete to make sure no grease shined in the light. The improvised stove went back into its hiding place, behind a loose cinder block near the floor, where the mortar had cracked decades ago and no one had bothered to fix it. It wasn't perfect, but it was all he had. Next door, Tone whispered, "Lobo." "Yeah." "I didn't ask you to do that, man." "I know," Lobo replied. "Now they gonna come for you." There was a pause. In the distance, keys jingled, the first sign that officers were getting ready to move down the line. Lobo leaned one shoulder into the wall, speaking low enough that only Tone could hear. "They always come for somebody," he said. "Tonight it just happens to be me." Tone was quiet for a long time. Then he said something Lobo didn't expect. "If they send you to the hole," Tone said, "I'm back to that tray. You know that, right?" Lobo exhaled through his nose. "Then we better not let that happen," he muttered. From a control pod, a loud voice barked over the intercom. "North Block, stand by for count. Return to your bunks. Face the front of your cells. Let's go, gentlemen." One by one, men sat on their bunks, back straight, eyes fixed forward. Some still clutched uneaten parts of their trays. Others had already pushed theirs aside. Tone put the tray down at the edge of his bunk. Half the food was gone. Half was still there. He looked at it like it was both his lifeline and his biggest mistake. Officer Bennett moved first, walking along the tier with another guard beside him. They stopped at each cell, checking faces against plastic count sheets. Ramirez, present. Caldwell, present. Hutcherson, present. Their voices echoed as each man sounded off. Present, present, present. Lobo kept his face neutral, eyes calm, posture controlled. Years in the system had taught him that the less emotion he showed, the safer he stayed. On the outside, he looked relaxed. On the inside, his mind was spinning. Not about the search. Not about the write-up. Not even about the hole. He was thinking about D-Train's words. You don't start a movement without checking in. The secret behind the cinder block. Officer Bennett crouched slowly, knees popping as he lowered himself toward the loose cinder block near the back of Lobo's cell. His flashlight beam slid across the concrete like a hunting dog sniffing for scent. Lobo didn't move. Not a muscle. Not an eyelid. He stood with his back against the opposite wall, hands clasped behind him, breathing steady and measured. Every man on the tier was silent now, the kind of silence that happens only twice in prison, right before a riot or right before discovery. "Come on," Bennett muttered to himself, his fingers touching the edge of the block. "Show me what you're hiding." The moment he got a grip on the concrete, Lobo's stomach tightened. He wasn't afraid of the hole. He'd been there before. He wasn't afraid of the write-up or losing privileges or getting stripped of his yard time. He was afraid of what would happen after. If the stove was found, the staff would crack down on all cooking. Every hidden setup on the tier would get sniffed out. Every inmate who depended on the stove crew's improvisation for survival, for health, for a piece of dignity, would pay the price. Tone, the diabetics, the older men who needed softer food, the guys with ulcers, the ones who couldn't handle the chow hole's unpredictable ingredients. This wasn't about a hobby. It was about people. His people. Bennett wedged his fingers deeper under the cinder block. Pulled. It moved an inch. Lobo's pulse hammered. Then suddenly, "Hey!" A loud shout echoed from somewhere down the tier. Another voice yelled, "Officers! Yo, officer! Over here!" Bennett twisted his head sharply. "What? What is it?" More shouting. Louder. Urgent. "God! We need help down here." Bennett stood up fast, dropping the flashlight. The beam danced wildly across the cell. "What's going on?" he barked. One of the other guards rushed up the stairs. "Bennett, you need to come look at this." Bennett swore under his breath, shot a long suspicious look at Lobo, then stepped backward out of the cell. "Don't move," he warned. Lobo nodded, but inside he already knew what had just happened. Someone had bought him time. Someone had planned this. The moment Bennett disappeared, the tier exploded with whispers. Was that planned? Who pulled that off? "Yo, Lobo's got angels tonight." But Lobo didn't look toward them. He looked toward cell 217. Tone's cell. Tone wasn't talking. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't even making eye contact. He just sat on the lower bunk, arms wrapped around his stomach as if he were in pain. Which he was. Tone coughed twice. Deep, awful coughs, like something thick was stuck in his throat. "Oh no," Lobo whispered. Because loud as it sounded, Lobo recognized it wasn't acting. Tone really was sick. And from the long, shaky breaths he was taking, from the sweat on his forehead, from the way he hunched forward like every muscle in his stomach was cramping. It was the food. Not Lobo's, but the chow he'd eaten earlier, before Lobo cooked the replacement. Tone had already been on the edge for weeks. Tonight pushed him over. The commotion wasn't a distraction. It was a medical emergency. And if Tone collapsed again, always, Lobo knew San Quentin would blame him, the inmate who gave him outside food, even though nothing Lobo cooked had ever harmed anyone. Meanwhile, Bennett and 2 other guards ran to Tone's cell. "What's wrong with you?" Bennett snapped. "Stand up. Stand up." Tone tried. His hands slipped. His head hit the bars. The tear erupted. "Hey, he needs medical. Don't move him like that. Call the nurse, man. Let him breathe." Bennett stepped back, jaw clenched, clearly panicking under his tough exterior. Officers are trained for fights, for riots, for non-compliance, not medical emergencies involving fragile inmates in overcrowded units. "Get the medical cart." Bennett shouted at the younger guard. "Now!" The younger guard sprinted away. Tone slumped sideways. His lips were turning pale. "Tone," Lobo whispered, his fists tightening at his sides. He wanted to run to his cell and hold him upright. He wanted to tell Bennett exactly what happened, how Tone's condition worked, what would help, what wouldn't. But inmates don't get that luxury. All he could do was watch. The whole tier watched with him. Tone lay on the floor now, breathing shallow, trembling. Bennett knelt again, one hand unsurely reaching out like he wasn't sure whether to touch the inmate or not. "You still with me?" Bennett asked. Tone's eyes fluttered. "Barely." Lobo felt something rise in his chest. Frustration, fear, anger, emotions he hadn't let himself feel in years. This wasn't supposed to happen tonight. Not like this. Not because of spoiled prison food. Men had survived lockdowns, riots, stabbings. And here was Tone, dying because the state gave him meals that weren't fit for dogs. Finally, the medical team arrived. 2 nurses and a gurney. They squeezed past bars, unlocked the door, and rushed inside. Tone's arm hung off his side. Limp. "Pulse is weak," one nurse said. "Get him strapped." Another shouted, "Move, move, let us in." They adjusted neck support, lifted his legs, checked his blood pressure. Men on the tier pushed to their bars, calling Tone's name. "Tone, stay up, bro. You got this. Don't go out like this." Lobo didn't say a word, but his jaw was locked tight enough to crack. Tone's body shook under the gurney straps. One nurse looked up sharply. "Call an ambulance," she told the guard. "He needs to go out now." Bennett grabbed his radio. "Control, medical emergency in North Block. Inmate Hutcherson needs outside transport. Yes, immediate." "Copy." As they wheeled Tone away, his arms slipped again. Instinctively, Lobo stepped toward his bars. Just an inch, just trying to see his face one last time before he disappeared down the stairs. Tone's eyes opened faintly. He looked at Lobo, just for a second, and mouthed, "Thank you." Then he was gone. The gurney rolled out of sight. The block fell into a feeling Lobo hadn't experienced in years. Real fear. Not fear of the guards. Not fear of punishment. The fear of losing someone. Officer Bennett stayed behind, staring at Lobo like all the pieces of tonight's puzzle had just reshuffled. "What did you give him?" Bennett asked quietly. Lobo stared back. "A meal that didn't kill him," he said. Bennett didn't respond. He didn't have to, because at that moment, every man on the tier realized the truth. If Tone made it through the night, everything would change. If he didn't, everything would change much, much worse. This wasn't just about cooking anymore. This was about who controlled survival inside San Quentin. And the battle for that control had officially begun. The night San Quentin held its breath. When the gurney carrying Tone finally disappeared around the corner and the heavy door clanged shut behind the medical team, a strange quiet washed over North Block. Not the usual quiet, the tired, defeated quiet that comes after chow or after count. This was different. It was a silence of uncertainty, a silence of waiting, of fear. Tone wasn't a shot caller. He wasn't a gang rep. He wasn't someone with connections or rank or soldiers behind him. But tonight, tone mattered. Because if someone that harmless could drop from bad food, then every man on that tier knew. It could be any of them next. The whispers began. As soon as the officers moved out of sight, voices rose in scattered bursts. What happened to him? He was sick for weeks. Man. Kitchen gonna kill somebody one day. That could have been me, bro. A lifer named Havoc slammed his fist into his bars. This place don't care about us, he barked. Not a damn bit. A younger inmate 2 cells down yelled back. They ain't supposed to kill us with the food. Man. More voices piled on. Some angry, some panicked, some just tired. Lobo remained still. He leaned against the wall in his cell, breathing slowly, eyes lowered to the cracks in concrete. His mind was racing, but he didn't let it show. Years in the system had taught him that the one who looks the calmest is the one nobody sees coming. But inside him, a storm was building. He had watched guys collapse before. Fights, heat stroke, asthma attacks, even a stabbing or two. But this? A man almost dying because the wrong food wrecked his insides. That hit different. It felt preventable. It felt avoidable. It felt personal. The guard who wasn't supposed to care. Officer Bennett returned to the tier several minutes later with another guard named Trevor, a younger guy with a kind of nervous energy that made everyone uneasy. They walked slower now, not barking orders, not rushing. You could tell they didn't know how to handle what just happened. Bennett paused in front of Lobo's cell again. You knew he was sick, Bennett said quietly. Lobo kept his gaze straight ahead. Everybody knew. Why didn't he report it? Lobo looked up. He did. Bennett's jaw tightened. You saying medical ignored him? I'm saying, Lobo replied evenly, that some conditions don't get treatment. They get shrugged off, and is the one paying the price. Bennett didn't argue, because he knew Lobo wasn't lying. There had been reports, internal memos going back years, about delays in care, understaffing, misdiagnosis. But the paperwork didn't matter to anyone right now. Tone was either alive or he wasn't. Officer Trevor, jittering beside him, finally broke the silence. Is he gonna make it? The question hung in the air like smoke. Bennett didn't answer. He didn't know. Nobody did. D-Train makes his move. Down the tier, D-Train stepped toward his bars, eyes fixed on Lobo. He didn't look angry anymore. He didn't look annoyed. He looked thoughtful, dangerously thoughtful. Hey, Ramirez. Lobo didn't respond. Ramirez. Lobo finally turned. D-Train nodded once. Listen, he said, what you did for Tone. People saw that. People understand that. But now you've got to think bigger. Lobo frowned slightly. Bigger than saving a man's life. D-Train shook his head. Bigger than one man, he said. You think Tone's the only dude sick in here? Look around. Half this block hasn't eaten in days. Other half forces down whatever's on the tray and prays it stays down. This ain't new. You just the first to do something about it. Lobo stiffened. I didn't do anything except feed him. D-Train smirked. That's exactly my point. He leaned closer to the bars. You fed one man tonight, but the whole tier felt it. Lobo didn't like where this was headed. Don't twist this, he warned quietly. I'm not twisting anything, D-Train said. But you opened the door, and once a door is open. He paused. Somebody's gonna walk through it. Lobo exhaled hard through his nose. Don't make this political, he said. It ain't. You don't get to decide that anymore. Those words landed like stones. Because in prison, intention doesn't matter. Perception does. And tonight, the tier had perceived something big. Lobo had fed a neutral, a sick neutral, and the guards couldn't stop it. And a man almost died because of chow whole food. And a random inmate's emergency had distracted officers before they found Lobo's stove. All the pieces added up to something Lobo never wanted. Leadership. The news they didn't want. Officer Travers' radio crackled suddenly. "North Block, come in. North Block, copy." Traver fumbled with the radio, panic in his voice. Yeah, this is North Block. Go ahead." "Medical wants you to know. Patient is en route to Morin General Hospital. Condition unstable. Repeat, unstable." A cold wave spread across the tier. Even the guys who never cared about Tone suddenly fell silent. Unstable meant one thing. Tone might not make it through the night. The officer continued. "They'll keep us updated when he arrives, but be prepared for incident reporting." Traver looked like he'd swallowed a rock. Bennett closed his eyes for a moment, the muscles in his face tightening. The inmates reacted instantly. "Oh no. They killed Tone with that food. He was sick for weeks. Bro. This place gonna get sued." Some men shouted in anger. Others cursed under their breath. A few banged on their doors. But Lobo, he didn't move. He felt something sinking in his chest, a heavy, cold feeling that made his hands curl into fists. He didn't know Tone well, but he knew suffering, and he knew injustice. And he knew that tonight, this block crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. When Traver and Bennett walked off, heading to the control pod, the tear erupted again, louder this time, rougher, more unfiltered, more emotional. "Ramirez!" Someone yelled from 3 cells down. "You hear that? Man, they're killing us with chow." Another voice from upstairs shouted, "We need your skills, bro. We can't eat that trash anymore." Someone else added, "Time to change how things run in here." Lobo's head lowered. These were the exact words he feared. Because desperation builds pressure, and pressure builds expectation. And expectation can turn into something dangerous, fast. He wasn't trying to become a symbol. He wasn't trying to start anything. He just wanted Tone to live. But inside a prison, the moment you fix a wrong, people expect you to fix every wrong. The mysterious message. A folded piece of paper suddenly slid under Lobo's bars. He looked down. A note. He didn't touch it immediately. Notes could be traps, setups, warnings, or worse. But after a moment, he bent down and pulled the paper toward him. No name, no signature, just 5 words. "Meet me at yard tomorrow." His stomach dropped. Nobody invited people to meetings inside prison unless it was serious. Dead serious. Yard meetings were how alliances were made and how wars began. When he looked up, D-Train wasn't at his bars anymore. His cell was dark, silent, closed. But Lobo already knew exactly who wrote the note. And why. Tone's life hung in the balance. The kitchen was under suspicion. The tier was on edge. And now, someone wanted to pull Lobo into something he couldn't walk away from. Outside, somewhere far from North Block, Tone was fighting for his life. Inside, Lobo was about to fight for something else entirely. Yard meeting at sunrise. The yard at San Quentin looks different at sunrise. Less violent, less chaotic, less like a battlefield full of invisible borders and unspoken rules. At that hour, before the weight of the day settles on everyone's shoulders, the prison almost seems calm, like an old giant catching its breath. But Lobo wasn't fooled. Calm inside San Quentin was just noise waiting to happen. And this morning, the noise was waiting for him. As the doors clanked open and inmates filed out in controlled lines, the chill from the bay pushed across the yard. Men pulled their state-issued sweaters tight, rubbing their hands, eyes scanning the open space instinctively. You always scanned. For safety. For threats. For the unexpected. Lobo stepped out, his muscles tight, his thoughts sharper than they'd been in months. He barely slept. The taste of worry was still heavy on his tongue. Worry for Tone, worry for the Stowe crew, worry for the cell search that thankfully ended early because a medical crisis pulled staff away. He didn't look left or right. He walked toward the bleachers, the spot the note sender would expect him to go. The rest of the tier watched him from a distance, whispering, nodding, speculating. Ramirez headed to his meeting. Hope he knows what he's doing. He ain't built for politics, but he ain't backing down either. Above all that noise was one silent truth. Everyone wanted something from him now. Some wanted better food. Some wanted the Stowe crew to expand. Some wanted change. Some wanted to use him. and some simply wanted him gone. As Lobo approached the bleachers, someone stepped out of the shadows under the metal frame. D-Train, hands in his pockets. Calm, serious, waiting. You came, D-Train said. You asked, Lobo replied. That ain't why you came. Lobo stayed quiet. D-Train tapped the cold metal beside him. Sit. Lobo didn't move for a moment, but then he sat today. Not because D-Train said so, but because refusing would turn this into something it didn't need to be. You know Tone's still in the hospital, right? D-Train said. Lobo nodded. Condition critical, D-Train continued. He made it through surgery, but they say he might have long-term damage. Lobo's jaw tightened. Because of the food, he said softly. Yeah, D-Train answered. Because of the food. A long pause settled between them. Men walked laps around the yard. The clank of weights hitting concrete echoed from a workout area. Someone further down shouted instructions for a push-up contest. A guard called for an inmate to step away from the fence. But none of that mattered. This conversation was a yard's center of gravity. After a moment, D-Train finally spoke. What you did last night, feeding Tone, was the right thing. Nobody denies that. Another pause. But it wasn't the smart thing. Lobo looked over. I don't regret it. Don't have to regret it for it to be dangerous. D-Train shot back. Listen, this tier is a powder keg. Always has been. Racial lines. Politics. Old beef. New beef. You start feeding one person, then 10 people, then 20, suddenly you're controlling something big. I'm not controlling anything, Lobo said. That's where you're wrong, D-Train said. You don't get to decide that anymore. Lobo stared at the yard. I didn't ask for this. Movements don't care who asks for them, D-Train said, voice low and even. They happen because people need them, and people need you now. Lobo shook his head. I'm not a leader. I'm just a cook. A cook who kept a man alive when the kitchen almost killed him, D-Train replied. A cook who built a stove out of trash. A cook who turned garbage into a hot meal right in front of the guards. You think men forget that? Lobo didn't answer. He didn't have to. D-Train leaned closer, lowering his voice. You got choices now. Lobo turned. What choices? 1. D-Train held up a finger. You shut everything down. No more cooking. No more feeding. Go back to trays and survive like everyone else. That hurts Tone, and everyone like him. D-Train nodded. Exactly. What's the second choice? Lobo asked. D-Train lifted a second finger. You keep cooking. Quiet. Smart. But bigger than before. You feed the sick ones. The older ones. The ones Chow Hall ignores. And you do it under the radar. With protection. Real protection. Your protection. D-Train didn't deny it. He simply said, if you want to help people in here, you can't do it alone. And the third choice? Lobo asked. D-Train's eyes hardened. You make this a statement. Lobo felt the tension in those words. A hunger strike, D-Train said. A protest. One that hits the administration where it hurts. The kitchen refuses to change. We force their hand. Lobo immediately shook his head. No, he said. No strikes. No riots. That'll get people hurt. D-Train leaned back. I didn't say riot. I said resistance. Same result. Lobo said flatly. D-Train stared at him. You think you can fix this one meal at a time. Ramirez. Cause if Tone dies. Lobo's head snapped toward him. Don't say that. D-Train didn't blink. If Tone dies, he repeated, you won't have a choice. This whole block gonna erupt, and they'll look to you first. Lobo's stomach twisted. Not because D-Train was threatening him, but because D-Train was right. Tone hanging between life and death wasn't just a medical crisis. It was a fuse, and it was already burning. Suddenly a guard blew a whistle from across the yard. Men looked up. Another guard tapped his radio. The intercom crackled to life. Attention, North Block inmates. Return to the building immediately. Repeat, Return to the building immediately. Yard recall. Unscheduled. That meant something happened. Something big. Lobo and D-Train locked eyes. You think this is about Tone? Lobo asked. D-Train shook his head. No, he said. This is about you. The truth hides in every tray. The north block doors slammed shut behind them, and as the inmates shuffled back to their cells, the entire tier buzzed with nervous energy. Keys jangled. Radios clicked. Footsteps rushed up and down the stairs. The guards weren't calm. The inmates weren't calm. And Lobo knew why. A message was coming. A decision was coming. A shift was coming. Tone's life hanging in balance. Lobo's hidden kitchen exposed. D-Train's offer on the table. The inmates hungry and angry. The administration alert and nervous. And through all of it, one truth echoing through San Quentin. Trash meals can break a man, but survival meals can bring men together. And when men come together inside a place built to divide them, everything changes. This story isn't over. Not for Lobo. Not for D-Train. Not for Tone. Not for North Block. And definitely not for the system that tried to control them through every tray they served. Because behind the walls of San Quentin, survival is a recipe. And tonight, a new recipe is being written.